All right. Welcome everybody to this online poetry reading with Jonathan McClure. We're hosting it through writers.com, and Jonathan's going to be reading some of his poetry this evening, followed by a open Q&A. Jonathan, do you want to turn your video on so we can see you as well as the man holding a hammer and the snail behind you? So I'm just going to say a little bit about Jonathan from his bio page on writers.com. Jonathan J.G. McClure holds an MFA from the University of California, Irvine. His poetry and prose appear widely, including in Best New Poets, Gettysburg Review, Green Mountains Review, and The Pinch, among others. He's the author of the poetry collection, The Fire Lit and Nearing, Indolent Books, 2018, and is currently at work on a book-length translation project. His work has been nominated for awards and honors, including the Pushcart Prize, Best American Essays, and Best of the Net, among others. He was a runner-up for an award from the Academy of American Poets. He is a book reviewer for several journals, including Colorado Review and Rain Taxi, and the former craft essay editor and assistant poetry editor of Cleaver magazine. And I also just want to read a little bit, I just want to read from Jonathan's Twitter bio, because this is like kind of the first time I actually met him is actually through his Twitter. And let me just read this. Poet, writer, teacher, 5 cats in a man suit. And yeah, so Jonathan, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. And I can't wait to hear what you've chosen to read for us today. And we'll have about a half-hour reading, and then we'll have time for an open Q&A. So yeah, without further ado, please take it away.
Great, thanks so much. So yeah, if you're having trouble hearing at all, say something in the chat window or the Q&A. Otherwise, I'll kind of go ahead and jump into it. So I'll be reading primarily from my first collection, The Fire Lit and Nearing, but I also have, toward the end, some deep cuts that you can't get in the book, so you heard it here first. So the initial set, these are all from the collection. This first one is called The Odyssey 2. After the joy, there are the questions, why he alone returned, the trial for his slaughter of servants and suitors who, after 20 years, formed the basis of the island's economy. With their deaths, the butchers and bakers go hungry and glare at the unshaven king, who strides the streets nightly, wailing, Ithaca, Ithaca, waking the children and frightening the hounds. He thinks of visiting the Cyclops, of writing the sorceress. He thinks the gods kept him lost for pity, pity for the little man who tosses in his creaking bed and dreams his little dreams of sailing back to the horse's dark belly, to huddled swordsmen and the smell of pitch, the blind prophet not yet weeping, the torches not yet touching, the great city not yet burned. And what is Penelope beside the idea of Penelope, for whom he longs beside the sea, watching the rise and dip of distant masts? Oh gods, may we find a way to her. So this next one is called Multiverse Theory, and it's one of several in the collection that kind of banks on my love of like cheesy sci-fi movies. And like many of the poems in the collection, it centers around this kind of failing relationship between 2 characters, the unnamed speaker character and a character named Ellie. And she is not named in this poem, but she is in some of the later ones, and is the you to whom the poem is spoken. So multiverse theory. There are worlds as real as this one, for every way we never meet. Worlds where you get hit by a bus instead, or I do. Worlds where you're the one driving the bus, and the squishy whistling noise I make as I'm sucked under the wheels haunts you so that you never drive a bus again. You become a lobbyist against unsafe busing practices. You symbolically bury the fenders of retired buses in tasteful but under-attended twilight ceremonies you imagine the man you hit with the bus would really have liked. There are others in which you find a way not to think about any of that, and instead keep driving the same bus for years, many years. There are worlds where the two of us are both on the bus and we take the same bus route every day and never speak. And there's nothing especially tragic in this, because you are just a stranger on a bus like any of the other strangers on any of the other buses I've ridden in my life. Strangers I must in some other worlds love deeply, and with whom I must have variable numbers of children, who will one day grow up to become bus drivers because of the charming story of how their parents met on a bus just like the bus that in some of these worlds I must be riding home in, sitting beside you, stranger, right now. There are, of course, worlds in which buses were never invented, in which humans were never invented, and little eyeless monsters worm through primordial ooze, eating one another or not eating one another. And their dull proto-fear is the closest thing to suffering in worlds where attachment has never been imagined or missed. I don't know if such worlds are better off than ours, but there must be a world in which I do. This next one is called Cafe Terrace at Night. It's based on a Van Gogh painting of a cafe terrace at night, and it's in a sort of residential area. So you've got people sitting in the cafe, and then above you've got people in their apartments and balconies and whatnot looking over, and you've got people walking up and down the street and so forth. Again, it's called Cafe Terrace at Night. After you left, everything was sexual. Our old friend blowing over the mug before she sipped, how she tightened her hold as we argued how to make her palms hurt. Around us, the dogwoods were no help, loosened buds, and the air thick with pollen. I know this was only transference, that even as she slipped the ring down and up her finger, she wasn't really who I wanted, but she was and was and was. We pour our hungers over trees, friends, anything manageably outside. In Van Gogh's painting, see how the awning shields the drinkers in their separate communions, how the terrace suspends them between cobblestones and starry smudges illuminating nothing, how the windows of homes glow warm and bronze and out of reach as I look not to you or her, but to the canvas, where branches push into view, where seats shine out their emptiness, where someone and her shadow are leaving arm in arm. This next one is a prose poem, or pardon, or a very short flash fiction. It's called The Cat. It's based on my own terrifying cat, who may make an appearance at some point, but is currently asleep, luckily. The cat. First, she'd bring a mouse, a bird, fur or feathers matted, eyes bulging, fang holes in the neck. Then one day a deer, the whole stag, matted, bulging, fang-holed. She purred her tiny purrs. Good cat, we said. Nice kitty. For a long time it was quiet. Then an SUV, wheels up and oil pooling. The tires twitched pitifully. She circled, rubbed, moved from leg to leg. We've got to tell someone. It only means she loves us. We'd buried the car when she brought down the jet. Dazed passengers filed out one by one. They called us terrible names. We scratched behind her ears, what else could we do, as she batted the oxygen masks. When the army came with their tanks, she ate their tanks and slinked toward the city. We heard great cries, then silence. Now she's dragging down the sun for us. The air gets hotter every day. Eggs boil inside their shells, pigeons burn mid-flight, but she looks so happy coming near, fire shimmering in her eyes. Weeping, doomed, we lay out her favorite treats. In the end, there's only love. And this next one is called Reverse. The man walks backward into a lamplit studio, where like him, the woman is crying. They scream in each other's faces until the tears recede back into their eyes, turning them from red to white. The two hold each other, grateful for this cure. They undress and lie beneath a cool sheet, make love and dress again. Months pass. Their faces begin to soften, and the pair looks younger. They take long, backward walks together. Happy at last, each no longer needs the other. They call, but spend most nights alone. In the final scene, the two are sitting close at a bar. He reaches into his coat and unfolds a paper where her number is written. She clicks a pen and carefully unwrites each digit. All nervous smiles, the man moves to a different table. He spits whiskey into a glass where cubes of ice are slowly forming. So this next one is based on a Magritte painting called Les Amants, or The Lovers, and I have it right here. So you can see it's, Zoom's not cooperating. There we go. It's a sort of wish you were here style vacation photo, and the two lovers have bags over their heads in this landscape. And so that is the painting it's based on. So it's called Nothing Will Be All Right, But Thank You Anyway. And that title, by the way, is from a song by Billy the Vision and the Dancers called Summer Cat. It was in a commercial for, I think it was Dom beer out of Spain in like 2010. So it had a brief moment of fame, but good song. Anyway, nothing will be all right, but thank you anyway. Want wants what it wants. In Magritte's Les Amants, two lovers, their separate heads in sackcloth shrouds, press together the spaces where their lips would be. Under the sacks, they can't have air enough, wrapped in darkness and their own stale breathing. But we want so much to believe they're happy despite it all. Though they'll never truly touch or see past the tips of their own noses. Though at the wedding she'll remove her bridal veil, only to reveal the familiar veil. Though they'll get a house and raise children whose lives they'll infer from muffled shouts, children who will cry and teethe and grow old from behind their own thick shrouds, maybe still they're happy. Or at least, maybe they could be. We can't know, after all, that they aren't content. Maybe never knowing how your lover looks at you is mercy, and they'll never have to pay for sunglasses. The sacks might smell richly of sandalwood and cinnamon. This next one is called Self-Portrait as Man and Pet. It's one of several self-portrait poems in the collection. You teach your sadness tricks. Speak, you say, speak, and sadness unhinges his whiskery jaw, lets loose concertos and ballads and arduous chapters of the great Russian novels. Good boy, you say, play dead. Sadness tries, he really tries, but he wiggles with pride, springs up to bound around the house, shedding ashes and bottle caps everywhere. Sadness eats his kibbles, but he wants your burger too. He begs at first, then swallows the stove. He's guilty for that and for pissing on the carpet, so he gives you dumb, soggy kisses, but takes to eating neighbors' cats. He takes to eating neighbors. No, you say, bad, and sadness hangs his massive head, drops his tail to whine. It's too late. You rent a truck and drive to the next county, lead him to the woods and leave him there snuffling the underbrush. But back home, you find him in the yard, charging you, heavy tongue flapping backward in the wind. He is a faithful sadness. He loves you so much. This next one is another one in the self-portrait series. It is called Self-Portrait as Ego and Vehicle. Every morning, my ego swims the backstroke across the muddy hot spring of my thermos. If I skip coffee, he's atop the toothbrush, playing a tiny harmonica, or curled up in a cigarette, grinning and reeking of menthol. He's lonely and clever and bored. His satchel holds many important documents. You said, I'm unhappy because of him, that he's the reason I need some reason not to shoot myself or make a strawberry Vicodin smoothie. I'm drowning in religio-cultural fantasies of purpose, you said, but it's okay just to be. To let go of ego is to let go of angst. And you're probably right, but I feel bad for the little guy, always trying to find his way in from the cold. And without him, what am I but a motorbike without a driver, wobbling and churning chunks of dirt, popping ridiculous wheelies? You and I know language is a rickety guardrail, all creaking and splinters, hardly any defense against the plunge into nothing. But ego still believes in it somehow, and I've got to admire the stubborn way he clambers aboard and grips my synaptic handlebars, steering between books, away from the bottle and ledges and train tracks. He's got a map and a decent sense of direction. His jacket is stylish, and he's a skilled repairman too. There's nothing he thinks he can't fix. So this next one is called The Astronaut, and I read this once at some kind of like meet your local writers event at a high school, and one of the kids totally sincerely was like, "Are you actually an astronaut?" And so of course I said yes, and just tried to run with it for the rest of the reading. And I think some of them believed it. No regrets. Anyway, this is called The Astronaut. And as far as I understand, this story about taping pillows to your face is a true thing that astronauts actually do. But with no further delay, The Astronaut. It turns out there's nothing to think of but yourself. There are stars, yes, and Earth hanging there like a big wet baseball. It's nice at first. Then it's routine. Then it's new versions of the old problems. Insomnia, for instance. You spend a life sticking your head on a pillow, but now the pillow just floats away. So you tape it to your face. Every night you tape the pillow to the side of your face, and you and the pillow float around together, bumping gently into walls. You always feel as if you're falling, so it's dreams of not falling that startle you from sleep. Outside the ship, you're inside the suit, a pressurized gray-white skin that holds your bones and meat together. Your toes are cold and you're bursting to touch someone, to feel anything beyond your clumsy, padded body, just like at home. But outside of you is cold and dark, radiation and vacuum, and if you could touch it, you'd burst in earnest. The breath in your lungs exploding outward in a rush that might sound, if there was such a thing as sound or anyone to hear it, like a clear, clear whistle or a call. This next one is called Write a Dream, Lose a Reader. That's a quote from Henry James about why you shouldn't write about your dreams, but I actually had this dream and did it anyway, so this is, with apologies to Henry, Write a Dream, Lose a Reader. Suddenly, I remembered the two huge pigs I'd been keeping as pets in my studio and hadn't seen for weeks. I called and called, "Here, pigs," and they came, covered in bed sores, they had fur, gone in clumps. Each had a collar and a name tag that read "Worker," a relic from the farm from which I must have saved them, and where I was beginning to realize they'd have been much happier than under my bed, where they'd gone to sleep or die without me. You see, I too was a worker, away all day to create little pamphlets on risk management and labor costs and heavy-duty scuppers, neglecting to love or walk or feed them. Now all I could do for penance was board my rowboat and push off alone into the night black sea. Oh, Ellie, Ellie, I've lost you as I lost them, and I'm sorry you're the pig in this conceit. Forgive me, I too was the pig, and you the dark place I could not be found. In penance now, I paddle out toward the non sequitur squall. This next one is just called Sonnet, and it is 14 lines, but otherwise it is a very loosely defined sonnet. And here we go. Sonnet, where all the parts are sad parts, sad elbows and toenails, sad noses, spiders you hated with their 8 sad legs and 1,000 black eyes that would look sad if they could, but instead look blank and frightening. Sad fear. Sad spider who ate her lover and will be eaten by dozens of babies drooling sad green ooze. Kill them with the paper. The news they splatter will be sad news. Oh, happy the squirrel whose claws rip bark from so many sad trees. Love is as it should be. This next one is called Ars Poetica, which is just the highfalutin term for a poem about the art of poetry. Again, this is based on a true fact that I found while I was kind of roaming around the town looking for fun facts on the internet. So, Ars Poetica. The Jazz Hall was built 40 feet underground to keep concerts in and street sounds out, a wonderful idea and an incredible fire hazard. So the city shut it down, and now it's stuffed with boxes, barrels, and scrapped pianos. This is the perfect place for the pianos. Think of the rats. At night, it's always night, they must scamper across keys that sometimes work, playing scales no one hears but that scare the rats shitless, driving them faster and faster along the shifting ivory floor, clanging and banging, filling the moss-damp hall with a music they want nothing at all to do with. And when it's over, they sniff the dark for whatever it was that chased them, because it must be out there still, and if only they could smell it, at least they'd know which way to run. This next one is called The Bookkeepers. That was the year we itemized our sadness. Legal paper to list each loss, every stranger we failed to meet, every friend we never learned to love, every cockatoo we didn't teach to speak. We filled page upon page, filled up the house, when the house buckled under its weight, sending our pages flapping skyward like so many untaught, wordless cockatoos. We added our notes and house to the list. We'd used all the world's paper, so we planted great forests and sawed them down and made more paper and then listed the forests. Nearly out of trees, we had to improvise. We started scribbling on friends who found our pens too sharp, our losses too obscure. We lost the friends. We lost ourselves in the maze of reams. We could find no way out, meaning now we had to list it all, the whole earth we'd left behind. With nowhere left to write, I turned to your skin. I kept working till I could no longer find you under miles and miles and miles of ink. And this next one is another prose poem or very short flash fiction, and it is just called Parable. The town went to the river to drown. Their despair was too great. It was the only way. The townsfolk lined the banks, filled their pockets up with stones. Our despair is too great, they said. It is the only way. The children had brought great coils of rope. They bound the elders' arms and then their own. The town stood on the bank, alone with what must be done. Months passed, years. At last, the town is ready. We are ready, say the children, grown older now. Let us drown, say the elders, grown tired and more gray. But by now, the river has gone dry. The town descends to the river's bed. They lie down against the hard, red clay. Each neighbor holds a neighbor's hand. Overhead, the dead trees sway. Let us pray now for rain, the children say. Yes, now let us pray. So this next one is another one that's kind of building off my love of like really terrible movies. And in this case, like really cheesy action movies, like anything with Kurt Russell from the 80s, basically. And this is kind of all of them rolled into one, but I was thinking especially of Escape from New York and Escape from LA, the sequel, of course. It's called Portrait of My Longings as B-Movie Script. There would be no misery my fist and feathered hair can't fix. My name tough and simple as a knobbed club, say Dirk or Viper. But the name's not so important. What is important is that when at last we rescue the president from his burning perch above the Barracuda tank, he says, "Thank you, son," and the orchestral swell, the slow zoom to a single tear threatening the edge of my eyeball, tell the viewer that symbolically I've saved my father, who 9 years ago, when agents in immaculate suits firebombed the family ranch, I couldn't protect, because I was deep undercover in the KGB, or a splinter of the CIA, but either way, what matters most is how my ex-wife, Ellie, the nation's top mathematician and the only one who could stop the CIA KGB from unleashing their nuclear biological suitcase missiles, then watches me with longing as I Krav Maga a path through waves of Spec Op ninjas. Once the detonators are diffused, she tells me something like, "I guess I miscalculated you." But that single slow-mo tear was utter purgation. With the world saved and my losses avenged, I am free from all desire. I conjugate Russian in my head like a mantra. I flex my many tattoos. I jetpack away into a mountainous sunrise, leaving the president in awe and Ellie wrapped in the long black fade of her perfect regret. This next one has had a bunch of titles, but I finally landed on Genesis. So this is called Genesis. When the first landfish squirmed its way out of the frothing sea and raised up on quivering fin legs, it must have been astonished. The shocking air in wet pink lungs, crunch of dirt, sun's blinding heat. How long did it stay up there, snuffling patches of knotted grass? But what I like to think of is the spawn of its spawn of its spawn. The first landfish that could no longer breathe water wasn't really a landfish at all. It must have felt still the ocean's pull, an instinct more bottomless than instinct, churning out urges to return. So it would dive again and again, each time flopping helplessly at last back to the shallows, retching salt water it learned to fear. And on shore, flexing the useless muscles of its vestigial gill flaps, it would spend its days eyeing the waves, inventing, deep in some fold of its almond-sized brain, our most fathomless wonder, love, and pain. This next one is called A Prayer. O whom I may concern, deliver me from desire. Make me as an empty basket and then unweave the basket. Teach me the sacred kind of loneliness. For you are the great solitude. Even I, your supplicant, do not know you exist. Divine loner, cosmic wallflower, teach me to know your silence as answer. Let me learn to suffer with the dignity of purpose. If there can be no purpose, then make me a duck on the currents of a swimming pool, content to splash and search for minnows that have never been. Teach me the satisfaction of stupidity. If it is your wish that I should live, then teach me terror. Draw dragons on the map of eternity's ocean. Give them many long and jagged teeth. Almighty watchmaker, I'm losing time. Wind me, bind me to your transcendental wrist, or unmake this fleshy nettle of gears. But do not leave me here ticking and chiming, pointless in the darkness of your holy junk drawer, amidst strange stars, strange tools and surplus stars. Another sci-fi one, this one is called Last Words of the Rocket Scientist. The final line is based on the fact that I think is really cool, that apparently the way that a satellite or spaceship or whatever orbits the planet is that it just keeps going sort of sideways and gravity's pulling it down, and so it's constantly falling, but it's going sideways fast enough that it just sort of falls in a circle. So this is called Last Work of the Rocket Scientist. Last Words of the Rocket Scientist. Movement means something to burn. The heron in the shallows burns bugs, who burn algae, who burn sun, shimmering on the surface of water, reaching up knobby heron knees. The heart burns whiskey and people and illusions of choice. I have been a man who always felt he was fumes. Burning with desire, we say. So want means move and move. The stars are far and long burned out. I'll be dead before the shining stops. Orbit means move faster than you fall. So yet another cheesy sci-fi poem. This one is based on, again, like B sci-fi movies, but also I'd been spending a lot of time on like Tinder and OkCupid and all those at the time, and it was starting to weigh on me. So this one is called "Three for the End of the World," and it's in 3 titled sections. So I'll read the number and the title into the poem. 1. Parable of the Sex Bot. Since we're all dead, there's no one to tell the last chatbot to stop looking for you tonight. So burning its backup generators, it asks again, and as programmed again, are you there? Are you there? Hello, sexy, don't be shy. Decades pass. We are still dead. 2. Parable of the Space Lizards. When the space lizards come to terraform the ruins, they study the sexbot's dying chirps, fuel depleted, circuits rusted almost through. They don't know how it got here or why it killed the world it needed in search of whatever it sought. Surely it knows there's no one left. Surely it knows it's dying. But all at once, they glimpse the sexbot's boundless longing, its love and suicidal hunger. It breaks their many octagonal hearts. They know they'll never feel so much. 3. Parable of the Many Octagonal Hearts. The lizards can't recover. The sorrow of the sexbot has ruptured the great cisterns of their sadness. The lizards, so alone, invent dating apps. The lizards invent chatbots. Space apes come to terraform the ruins. So I have, I believe, 4 more for you tonight. This one is the one from which the title of the collection comes. The collection, which I have here, if you can see it, is called The Fire Lit and Nearing, and that's an excerpt from a line in this poem. And I wrote this while I was doing my MFA, and so lots of workshops, and I was thinking about all the sort of cliches you're not supposed to use, and how we all still really want to use them because they're cliches for a reason, and they speak to us in various ways. And so this poem is called "I Want to Light a Book of Matches." I want to light a book of matches and think how true the scrape and bloom, bright phosphorus, wood unweaving to heat and smoke. To feel this is how it was, yes, the fire lit and nearing, no matter how I'd shift my grip. Fingers burned but not yet ready to let the black stems fall. To feel it and not to follow with no, you cannot call a love of fire. To let the feeling stay unburied, to go back when we kissed in the old chapel graveyard and didn't think symbol, only yes, only you alone. This next one, kind of in a similar vein, is called Raleigh-Durham International, after the airport near where I was living at the time. But I was thinking about how, when you're sort of living one of these very dramatic relationship breakdowns that's like not interesting to anybody else, to you it seems like it's this sort of high tragedy and epic worthy saga, even though you know intellectually that it's not, but you still feel that, and so this poem is kind of riffing on that. Raleigh-Durham International. You know that scene in Virgil, how Aeneas ran back screaming for Creusa in the burning city? I first read it outside the airport, smoking as I thumbed the copy you'd given me. You'd said to return it next time I saw you. We knew that meant it was mine to keep. But people move apart. It's no great tragedy. We knew that too, of course. I ground the embers into an ashtray. 3 times, Aeneas threw his arms not around his lover or her ghost, but the hollow space where the ghost had been. Shadow of a shadow of what was lost already. The warm night thick with smoke. And so I have, I think, 2 more, something like that. 3 more, I think. And these are the deep cuts that aren't in the collection, and maybe will be in a future one, but just so you have heard them. I've got a request in the Q&As to see the cat. Hopefully she'll make an appearance. She's very asleep right now. But this one is called The Turtle Paradise. And I swear this is a real gas station in California that this is based on. The Turtle Paradise. Outside Peters Canyon at a chevron off I-241, you'll find the Turtle Paradise. Left of the pumps, past the McDonald's, a stand of stones and still water fed from a calcified spigot. Thick green film clots the top, through which the turtles sometimes prod their pruny heads. Silk plants stuck between rocks, a broken pump's angry burble, the wet, dark glares of the turtles. They seem to understand. Maybe this is where bad turtles go when they die. If Dante had his way, these turtles would be the turtles who in life had schemed to swerve drivers off the road. Drivers like the old man gassing up his truck who explains above the pump's clunk that the owner used to tend them better. And it's a real goddamn shame, but there's nothing to be done. And after all, they're only turtles, and they probably don't mind. This next one, very short one, is called A Magician at the Market. Yeah, I don't have a lot of context for this one. It was, I always think of it in a particular Trader Joe's, but that's all I've got. A Magician at the Market. The bald man who eyes the cantaloupes and leans on his scuffed cane simply refuses to change into you. This seems like stubbornness. After all, remember what skill you and I once had. For our last trick, we will become strangers, not once taking our hands off each other. I was sure I'd never known you. This last one, I wrote, I was doing my grad school in SoCal, and so, you know, I was a grad student and had no money, but I was in Orange County, surrounded by all the money, and so we used to, you know, me and my cohort used to go to the beach and kind of walk around, and we'd be walking through these neighborhoods full of like super fancy houses that, you know, we were afraid to even look at in case they would charge us. So this was kind of based on that. It's called Even the Magnates. Even the magnates in the seaside homes must get fed up eventually. The daily parade of tourists, if I had the money, I wouldn't paint it like that. Sand in the bed sheets and pelican shit spackling the breakfast patio. When a friend's dad bought himself all the stables and greenhouses he wanted and still wasn't happy, he knew it was time to buy a pecan farm. He wanted his son as his partner, but the two hadn't spoken without shouting for years, and even the photos and little baggies of pecans in the mail weren't enough to persuade him. Last he heard, the old man couldn't stomach the surplus, pecan sandwiches, smoothies, pecan kebabs, and was thinking of selling the place, which is a shame, since in the photos, the trees really were lovely. A woman I loved had to spend a teenage summer, I swear, on her expat aunt's alpaca ranch, and to this day gets angry when she sees home weaving or livestock on hills. So maybe it's for the best that the places I've come to hate aren't nearly so beautiful, that I can drive after work to Seal Beach, and though it's sad the yachts killed all the seals, I can sit and watch the sun settle between the rocks and feel nothing overly complicated. And maybe some evenings, when the magnates can no longer stand the gulls squabbling in their trash cans or the anger of their sons, they rent old Hondas and drive them to my street, blasting the music that keeps me up most nights. Maybe they sit atop their warm, warped hoods and imagine this is peace at last. Well, that's all I have. So I think we're into the Q&A portion. Thanks everyone for attending, and I think Fred is going to kind of explain how the Q&A works.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. That was really good. Well, yeah, the Q&A is pretty simple. We have this little chat feature in at the bottom. I'm sorry, I said chat, but actually there's a Q&A feature. I'll check both, but the Q&A feature is really helpful because it actually lists your questions chronologically and I can mark them as answered. So please, whenever you're ready, just write into the Q&A And so far, we've got a question which I think was answered, which is, can we see Zoe, Jonathan's cat? I think the answer is if she wakes up. And then Kay also asks, I love the focuses on the bee movies, astronaut and animal metaphors, and Ellie. What topics are you interested in and exploring now?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, I'm still interested in a lot of the same kinds of things, I think. But you know, having written a book that was so focused on one particular event or particular relationship, you know, once that was over, I sort of felt like I'd lost that kind of low-hanging fruit. I remember talking to another poet who he felt like he couldn't write anymore until he came up with some like, you know, easy concept, and then he could just wing it from there. So he came up with the concept of writing about places that you're not normally at night. And once he had that, it was super easy because he could just be like shoe store at night, gas station at night, you know, restaurant at night. And the book, it's Alan Shapiro's Night of the Republic. It's great. I highly recommend it. But I feel like in some ways I'm still kind of waiting for my next like low hanging fruit. In the meantime, since then, you know, I've been writing kind of a bunch of different things, but nothing that I felt was sort of thematically unified. Other than I recently finished a translation of a Spanish language collection into English that came out at the tail end of last year. And that one was all about like swimming and oceans and bodies of water and that sort of thing. But again, it was translation. So.
Thanks. And guys, feel free to ask follow-up questions. I'll take them as they come. Susan asks, what is your process? How do you approach the work each day, each week, so on?
Yeah, so this is kind of one of those do as I say, not as I do questions for my students. But my writing it's always been kind of sporadic. Like I'll have a period of silence and then a period of writing all the poems and then nothing and then all the poems. And I, you know, definitely recommend writing every day and that kind of thing. But it's not something that comes sort of naturally to me, and I have to really kind of make myself do that. But in terms of the process for a specific poem, it tends to be, I mean, it depends a lot on the poem. I've had some that, you know, I wrote it and it sort of sprung onto the page fully formed and it minimal revision and it was great. And, you know, that made me very happy. Others where it was months of just sort of like banging my head against the wall, moving commas around, trying to get it right. And oddly, there doesn't really seem to be a correlation between like which I feel better about. Some of my favorites were just like super easy. Others were a whole long struggle. But I tend to kind of edit as I go, and I'll have sort of lots of distinct drafts within one document. And whenever I'm going to be making kind of radical changes, I will copy the whole thing, paste it again, and then do whatever I was going to do so that if I decide that whatever I just did was a bad idea, I can undo it and revert to the older version. And that makes it kind of less intimidating to make dramatic changes or cuts since I know that nothing's like actually lost. But yeah, I hope that answered the question.
Anita asks, what has especially surprised you about your poetry in general and or a poem in particular?
So I think one thing that really surprised me was when I sort of was first writing poems and, you know, through like the first several years of that and the first couple of years of doing my MFA and all those things, I'd set out to write like, you know, sort of serious poems. And, you know, I didn't feel like I was allowed to like joke around and have fun and that kind of thing. And, you know, a lot of the poets that I admire are, you know, very like capital S serious poets. But somewhere along the line, actually the first poem that I wrote that kind of switched gears was the one about the seaside homes. Somewhere along the line, I sort of decided to start, kind of letting more humor and playfulness into it, and it was kind of a 180 in terms of like what I'd been writing up to then. And so like the sort of collection that I'd been working on, probably 90% of it got scrapped and replaced with sort of like new stuff that I'd done like all in the span of a couple of years. Because I felt like I'd finally sort of hit upon the kind of poem that I wanted to be writing and reading. But it sort of came out of nowhere. It was, I remember I just read a collection by Dobby Gibson called It Becomes You. And, I'd read some sort of like zanier poets before, but something about that specific one, it was like just a switch flipped and I suddenly got it, like, oh, I can like mess around and have fun and just sort of, be playful with it. And that totally changed the way I thought about things.
As a quick follow-up to that, so I have your collection, I bought your collection, and reading it, it felt sad was the main way it felt. Just like it reminded me of my own experience of being heartbroken. But hearing you read from it, I mean, I had seen that layer there, but hearing you read from it, I was shocked by how funny it was. And I found that the humor and the sadness actually heightened each other. It was kind of like a sweet and sour sauce kind of thing. And it feels like very particular to my experience of reading your poetry, that it like really whipsaws between humor and sadness. Like your poem, like there's a poem that you read that is like, that must use the word bus like 60 times, And it's like, maybe I've been hit by a bus, maybe you've been hit by a bus, but it's, there's an undercurrent of sadness, but it's also extremely funny. And do you specifically do you specifically work on heightening those things through that kind of duality? Or, I mean, maybe it's not as studied as that, but it's just one of the main things that strikes me listening to your poetry is that kind of whipsaw between humor and sadness and something like heart as well.
Well, I appreciate it. Thank you. Yeah, so I mean, I think so. It's a weird inspiration to cite, but one of my favorite shows when I was younger was Scrubs, if you ever saw that. It was a sort of parody of like ER style doctor shows set in this hospital, and it was very funny. Zach Braff hamming it up for half an hour, but it was also at the same time like very, very dark, because they didn't shy away from the fact that like people died all the time and that was part of their job, and they're having these sort of like zany adventures, but it's playing out against this backdrop of like really real heartbreak, and some of the characters that we've known since the beginning just up and die, and that's how life is. And so I think something that what I really loved about that show, and something that I kind of want to do in my own work is like you said, that sort of playing those two things off one another, and I do think they heighten each other, and I think that it's hard to separate those things in a lot of ways. I mean, I think just the way that we experience anything, like a lot of these poems were based on a sort of real heartbreak, and it was tremendously sad at the time for me, but at the same time, like a lot of it was really ridiculous, and I knew that, and so I kind of wanted to try to be true to both of those, if that makes sense.
Thank you. So I'm going to bundle two questions together here. One is, how did you come to be interested in writing poetry initially? And the other is pretty similar. When did you first realize poetry was calling you as a creative calling? How did you know? Do you have other creative callings?
Yeah, so it's, I wish I had like a really good origin story, but no, I needed a class to fill a requirement in college, and intro to poetry writing was open. I was already an English major, and I'd like, wanted to try creative writing, but I'd always hated it in school. Like, high school was just the worst thing to have to do the creative writing assignments, but tried it anyway. If fiction had been open, I may have done that. It was just kind of luck of the draw, which one had a seat and which one didn't. So I took the class, and I just got really lucky. It was taught by a North Carolina poet named Michael McPhee, who's great. Recommend him to everybody. He writes like the definitive poems about trivial subjects. He has a poem about like the blinking colon on the alarm clock, things like that. So I took his class, and like he was very sort of no nonsense, but very funny. And so like he wouldn't hesitate to tell you if your poem was like kind of terrible, but like in a way that was encouraging. So taking that class, like I thought I was doing terribly, and so we had our like mid-semester conference, and I'm ready for him to tell me that I should get out and never come back or whatever. But no, he encouraged me to keep going, and I did. And I really wanted to be good at it. And I think what I was writing at the time, not good. I mean, I was a beginner. I didn't know what I was doing, but I think he knew how much I wanted to be good at it, and that I was going to, sort of keep working at it. And I did. And again, just kind of got lucky and had a series of really great teachers, and just kind of fell more and more in love with it. Since then, poetry's been kind of my main focus, but I've also written quite a bit of creative nonfiction, and some fiction to a lesser extent. And so sort of all of those kind of appeal to me in different ways.
This question's quite similar, so there may be very similar or not. But Amber asks, who inspired you to write poetry to articulate your thoughts and emotions?
Yeah, again, I just got lucky. I had a series of really great teachers, again, all of whom I recommend to everybody. Michael McPhee, Michael Chitwood, Alan Shapiro, Amy Gersler, Michael Ryan, James McMichael, some others, just like lots of poets that, I read their work, and, it like, I wanted to do that, and, but aside from that, I mean, the first poetry class I ever took, like we got the sort of like, the little 1-volume Penguin anthology of poetry that runs from like pre-Shakespeare to today, and just kind of skipped around through it. And, there was just a lot that I liked from a lot of different eras. And, when you first start, or at least when I first started, you know that you're not living up to that, but you want to. And so it's sort of encouraging to keep going, and to try and to learn to do that. And it can be hard at first, because your taste is better than your expertise at first, right? But eventually, as you sort of get more and more able to emulate the things that you want to emulate, it becomes sort of increasingly encouraging to kind of keep dipping back into them.
Kay asks, has COVID impacted your artistic process?
No, I don't really think so. I mean, I think it's harder in some ways, because like, it's there's more just like looking at the same walls and not kind of going out and doing things. And so it's harder to kind of translate experience into writing. But I mean, I try to remind myself that I think it was Rilke said something to the effect of like, any artist who's lived to be 10 years old already has like a lifetime's worth of material. Like you've kind of you've got all sorts of experiences to mine, even if you're sort of locked away in a room today. And so it's, you know, it's hard to remember that, but I try to remind myself that.
Susan asks, do you have trusted readers who you run drafts by, or do you work solo and then trust the editors to let you know how it sounds?
More the trusted readers. I mean, within poetry, and I think it's different in fiction. I don't have as much experience to really say, but within poetry, like by the time you're submitting to editors, it tends to be kind of a take it or leave it sort of deal. And it's fairly unusual to have the kind of like back and forth that you hear about, you know, like a Ray Carver, Gordon Lish, like kind of collaboration like that doesn't really happen. So yeah, more the trusted readers. And you know, I like to run work by both other poets and writers and people who aren't, because I think it's, you know, it's important and it's interesting to get feedback from, you know, readers who aren't also writers and so aren't really approaching it in the same way, and kind of get that different view on it, which I think helps.
So we have a few more minutes for questions. If anybody else wants to post into the Q&A, I'm happy to read them. We have one that's there, and I wanted to ask a question of my own. There's a poem you read that I maybe either haven't read or maybe it wasn't in the collection, I'm not sure. But you talk about the first land animal that couldn't breathe water.
Hmm.
And it was still pulled to the ocean. And so it's like constantly diving into the ocean and then washing back up on the beach half dead. And you use this line, retching salt water it learned to fear.
Hmm.
And I just felt like, I'm very curious if you remember, you know, what your process was for that, because it feels like it touches something very kind of primal. And I wonder if you get that way through language you find yourself there, or you wake up in the middle of the night feeling something and you manage to put language to it, or something else entirely. Can you shed any light on that?
Yeah, it's been a while, so I'll try to remember. But I mean, I was writing it around the same time that I was writing, you know, a lot of the other poems for the collection, kind of around this relationship. And you know, I felt as I was writing at the time that I was writing about this relationship, but it was really just kind of the occasion to think about something more kind of fundamental, which was to me that, you know, if you should be able to connect with anyone, and if you should be able to understand anyone, it ought to be this person that you're so close to. And the fact that you still can't, and there's still always this gap, and it's sort of the closer you get, the harsher that relief becomes, you know. And so I was thinking about that a lot, and about that sense of kind of just continuously longing to bridge a gap that you just can't. And so the kind of landfish wanting to go back to sea just popped into mind as the sort of stand-in for that feeling. And then I think from there, I think the bit about retching the salt water it learned to fear, I think that kind of came from the writing itself. And as I was, you know, I had the initial image of like the land animal wanting to stop being a land animal. And as I was kind of writing out that story and imagining what that looks like, it kind of suggested more and more images that then kind of changed how I thought about the story, that then suggested more images and so on. So it was kind of a cyclical process, as I recall.
Thank you. Okay, so let's do two more. Here's one. How much do you write for you and how much for your readers? Love the astronaut and the turtles.
Thanks. Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I mean, I think you have to write the kinds of poems that you want to read, you know, and that's something that I, felt, I was talking about kind of having this realization of the kind of poems that I wanted to write. And it was that I realized I wanted to read I wanted to have kind of more fun with the reading. And so in that sense, you're writing for yourself. But, I think you do have to keep your readers in mind, and you have to kind of read as if you didn't know your own work. It's hard. Like in some ways, the least about your poem because you know the most about it. And so like things are totally obvious to you what you're talking about or what you want the reader to feel or whatever that aren't necessarily actually on the page because they're just like in your own head, and so it's kind of learning to read it as an external reader or to think about that external reader. I think there's a certain kind of contemporary poetry that kind of started with the modernists and progressed from there, that it kind of thumbs its nose at the reader, and if you don't understand it, I don't care, that kind of thing. And I can't get behind that. To me that suggests an attitude in which the author thinks that they're entitled to the reader's time, and I don't think that's true. Like if I'm not entertaining you, like go make a sandwich, like there's no reason, you don't owe me anything, and so in that regard, I always try to keep the reader in mind in terms of, is this interesting to anyone other than me, and if it's not, then I might keep it for myself, but I wouldn't necessarily put it out there.
Okay, Robin, I'm saving your question because it's such a good question to end on. So we'll do Amber's question, then we'll get to Robin's, and maybe that'll be a wrap. Amber asks, do you use poetry as a coping mechanism or an act of defiance?
Yeah, the way that I always thought about it at the time that I was writing most of these poems, especially, was, and this is oddly on the nose right now, but the way that I thought about it was kind of like doing tests on a virus in a lab, in that, like, out in the world, these sort of big, sort of painful feelings are dangerous and scary and threaten to sort of overcome you. But in the lab atmosphere of the poem, you can sort of, twist them around and see what happens if you poke them and all that, and in a way that it's not going to kind of spiral out of control. And so a coping mechanism in a way, yes, also a way of kind of, understanding your life circumstances in a way that you can, it sort of converts it into an aesthetic problem, right? And so instead of like, oh, what do I do about this? My life's falling apart. Instead, it's like, how do I get this line to rhyme with line 7? And so it kind of lets you come at it from a different way, and you may get some of that clarity when you're not trying to,
That's cool. So Robin asks a very, very good question to wrap us up. Robin says, I know nothing about poetry other than what I learned in high school and college. I feel drawn over the last few months. Is your The Craft of Poetry class a good starting point?
It's a great starting point. No, obviously I recommend everyone should take that. It's great. But no, aside from that, there are a ton of great resources out there. Any kind of anthology, like I like the Penguin Pocket anthology a lot. There are some great craft manuals, like the Poet's Companion by Advenizio and Lau, or Poetry Handbook by Mary Oliver. There's also the Poetry Foundation that has just a ton of poems available for free. Likewise for the Academy of American Poets. So there are just like a ton of great resources, free resources, to kind of immerse yourself in the both like the tradition and contemporary poetry. Also a lot of literary magazines, if anything, too many, where it's hard to kind of find one to start with, but lots and lots of places that you can get poetry without having to to pay for it. But if you're interested in writing it and taking the workshop, of course, I would love to have you in the workshop.
And Jonathan, would you like to say anything about just the range of things you teach at writers.com? Because you're not only a poet, you teach other subjects as well.
Sure, yeah. So I teach an intro to poetry class. I teach a more advanced one focused on creating a chapbook or a short collection. I teach the literary essay, and I teach a new one we've just started that is sort of experiments in genre, and it's sort of a catch-all for anything weird, so like metafiction or you know, stories in verse or concrete poetry, or you know, just things that don't fall neatly into a category, and kind of looking at what happens when a particular piece kind of straddles the line between multiple different genres.
Okay, well, this is such a good question. I'm sorry, I'm going backwards in time, but Janie asks, what poets have inspired or influenced you the most? And that really is the last question.
Yeah, no, and thanks everyone for coming and bearing with me as I think of these. But I mean, so many. Off the top of my head, in no particular order at all. Louise Gluck, Robert Haas, Thomas Lux, Terrence Hayes, Philip Larkin. Man, so many. You know, if I'd had like 30 minutes, I could have come up with a really good list for you. But there are a whole lot, and it's very hard to pick. Oh, Carrie Fountain, love her. And Amy Gersler, but really just a whole lot, including, you know, going way back to like, you know, some of the romantic poets and you know, the anonymous balladeers and people like that. I mean, there are great things to find from any era, so.
Jonathan, thank you so much for your time and for reading your gorgeous and funny and sad and heartfelt poetry. I appreciate it so much. Oh, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I lost you for a second.
Oh, sorry. Well, just thank you so much for reading your gorgeous, funny, sad poetry for us and for answering our questions. Thank you. This was such a great great experience.
Thank you for doing this, and thanks everyone for coming. Much appreciated.
Yeah, thank you all.
Have a good night.
Have a good night.